Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, continuing our Big Ten previews as we hit the number 13 team in Rod's list, the Washington Huskies. One of the newer additions to the Big Ten, obviously, from starting last year. The Huskies were dreadful last year and finished last, and so they are still going to be the first new Big Ten team we'll talk about in this list of 18 teams. Obviously, we're here predicting they'll be in the Big Ten tournament at seeded 13, so they'd be third from last. And Danny Sprinkle was a new coach last year. It was his first season. We didn't expect them to be good, and they definitely delivered in that aspect. They were 13-18 overall, 4-16 in the Big Ten, and that's actually with a couple of games late because I think they won like one game for a long time, and they just sort of managed to get a couple in a row, and then they were pretty awful. They were bad in about every possible way. They were sub 100 in offense, sub 100 in defense. They couldn't hang on to the ball. They couldn't rebound. They couldn't shoot, and so I mean, Danny Sprinkle definitely was highly touted. It came from it was Utah State, I believe, right?
Yep, that's
And
right.
he is reshaping the program. And I think anytime you get a first year a coach, there's a lot you get a pass in some respects, especially in today's era, and going to a place where there's not been a whole lot of success, or at least on a consistent basis. So he's reloading the team, and can't do much worse than last year. In fact, I guess you could
Well,
argue can't do any worse.
you do and you don't get a pass. In the old days, you get a pass. I'm not sure how much that applies anymore because, we have these coaches all have the ability to completely overhaul their rosters. Now,
Right.
I think you and I believe that there's a cost that comes with having to do that. And I think there is, but I'm not sure that's a universally held belief. And the fact is, he had one of, if not the highest priced portal edition on his roster
Right.
last year in Great Osbar, and it didn't matter. Um,
Right.
I think that it was obvious. So when we looked at the roster, it was obvious to me at least. Yeah, this team's not going to be able to compete. We only picked them ahead of Minnesota, and in fact, they ended up being the first team in Big Ten history to finish 18th. So they were
Right.
dead last. Um, they just didn't have the horses. I mean, they didn't really have a point guard, not a real point guard, and that's a huge, huge problem to try to have to overcome.
Right.
And that was the most glaring issue, but there were many, many of them. As you noted, they were sub 100 in Ken Palm in both offensive and defensive efficiency. It's kind of tough to win in the Big Ten if you're sub 100 in both.
Right. Because most teams are going to be
Yeah,
70 at worst. The bad teams are like 70, unless you're Iowa in
you'll
defense or something
see
like
the
that.
occasional Big Ten team be sub 100 on defense. Like you say, Iowa under Fran McCaffrey, an example, and there have been others. But
Yeah.
usually those teams will balance that at the other end. You rarely see teams that are sub 100 in both. And when they are, well, that's how you get 4-16. I
Right.
mean, in some ways, it's remarkable they won as many as four
I
games.
I think so.
Um, but I think you have to look, as you said, Sprinkle is a guy who's won, and he's won at a couple of different places. Most recently, Utah State, although his stay there was brief. And I think there is a belief that he's at least a solid coach, and he's done the right thing. He's overhauled the roster. And I think a lot of people outside of Seattle are pretty excited about what that looks like. I am probably under, if there was a Vegas line on where Washington's expected to finish this year in the Big Ten, I am probably on the under.
Uh-huh.
I've got them 13th, right?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who think this is an NCAA tournament team. And I don't think that's out of the question by any means. I just am in a position where, for a variety of reasons that we'll get into, I need to see it before I'm going to say I expect it. What he's done, to his credit, is he hasn't just gone with one approach. A lot of coaches, as we know, we've been talking about this, enter into the quick fix of the portal.
Yeah.
And he's added a lot of transfers and actually guys who individually have accomplished some things. He's got a good portal class. but he also has a very strong high school class as well. So their talent level has clearly been raised. I don't think there's any question about that. And but as I say, I think the question is, as it always has to be in situations like this, how well do all those pieces fit together? And maybe just as importantly, can Danny Sprinkle begin to establish the foundation of what his program is going to be? Can he start to establish, this word that everybody throws around but doesn't necessarily mean much most places, culture?
Yeah,
Can he get
identity.
a
Yeah.
culture, the beginnings of that? Because last season, I don't think that happened at all.
Now I don't
There's
know what they were. Yeah.
right. There's what can you point to and say, well, we talk about this like Steve Peichel, his early first couple of years at Rutgers. They struggled, but you could absolutely see what he wanted that program to be. And their
Right.
recent struggles, as we discussed, I think are largely attributable to that slipping. He had a culture and then he's kind of lost it. Danny Sprinkle's got to get a culture established. And as we say, I don't think either one of us felt there was any one identifiable thing you could say about, well, this is what Washington basketball is going to be about. Not stylistically, not terms of tone, nothing.
Yeah.
So, you look at them last year, they were a mid paced team. They didn't take an excessive amount of threes. Sprinkle was promising they're going to look to play much faster this year, which my usual response to that is, uh oh.
We'll see.
And not because I'm worried about it from an MSU perspective. It's because that usually does not go well. But
Hmm.
we'll see. And and then they played half court defense without applying much in the way of pressure. So it's just kind of you can't really point to anything and say, well, that's what they are. For their sake, I think if that's going to be a real program to contend with in the Big Ten, we can't be saying the same thing next year. We got to start
Right.
finding out what they're going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. They're only. I think their only identity last year was losers, and they they
That's
lost.
it.
They
Taking
lost badly a
taking
number of times.
uncompetitive L's. Right.
Yeah. They
They when they
like at
lost,
East
they weren't
Lansing. That
even
was crazy.
close. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like they were close losses. All right, so that season recap was brought to you by Nudge Printing, the OG for the Final Four is on the schedule. They're the first sponsor we had, and they provide all the gifts and prizes for all our contests, including the Beat Rod contest, which is what we're going through right now in some respects. Rod makes his prediction 0 to 18, or sorry, 1 to 18 as far as the final standings of the Big Ten. He obviously has Washington here as 13. If you think you can do a better job of predicting 1 through 18, send over your answers to me at eric@tffinots.com. Make sure you put down as a tiebreaker how many points Michigan State scores against Michigan in their two meetings this season. That's just Michigan State. Again, to get that in before the first Big Ten game, which is sometime in December, I'll have plenty of other reminders. It costs nothing, and you can win some great, great, great gift cards with gives you some great apparel at Nudge Printing, who has fantastic stuff, super comfortable shirts. They are screen printed, so they last forever, multiple washings. You can get stuff from that are just TIFF knots if you want to go to nudgeprinting.com/TFFINOTS, or just all the regular Michigan State stuff, really cool vintage logos, current logos, any sport you want, caps, coats. They got the whole thing, and we've got a bunch of it in our family, and it's everybody's favorite stuff. So head on over to nudgeprinting.com and get your stuff today. All right, so we're going to begin with departing players and retained players, beginning with, of course, the one you first mentioned, Great Ozabor. He was the guy who not only was the leading scorer and assist player, but I mean, he was kind of like, in some ways, I felt like Washington was like a really, really bad version of Michigan, that you had their big guy sort of run the offense through their, power forward or center. I guess I don't know exactly what you call him, but he averaged 14.8 points a game, 8 rebounds a game, shot 47, 25, and 62. So I think, that was probably certainly underwhelming shooting from a guy. I think he had to do a whole lot more, and he just did not deliver there. And I think that's a good example of like him versus, say, Dawson Garcia, who was able to deliver that on a bad team. He was able to deliver enough to give him enough wins to, get him to the Big Ten tournament. And
Yeah,
Ozapor couldn't.
I think that's actually a really good point. I think if you needed like a bell cow, guy you could just put the team on his back and drag him to a few wins, Dawson Garcia was much better in that department than Osibor was. I just say, he was reportedly one of, if not the most expensive portal guy in the country last
Yeah.
season.
Of course, we don't know
And
for sure, but it was expensive.
but
At
that's
least,
the
yeah.
word.
Right. Yeah.
And I just think when that happens, man, look, it's just like the pros, right? When you sign the big time contract, like it or not, expectations come with that.
Absolutely.
And by that standard, he was a terrible, terrible return on investment for Washington. 14.8 points, 8 rebounds a game sounds fine, but this is the highest priced guy in the country, supposedly, or one of them.
Yeah.
Are those the number? No, you would expect 20 and 10 at least
And
starting there.
dominating games. And he never,
Right.
I don't think there are many games you felt like he ever dominated. I like the ones I'd watch. I didn't watch all Washington
No,
games.
and I think, one thing is we have to remember, yes, he put up great numbers at the mid-major level, but when you're a big, but you're only like he was about 6'8",
Mm-hmm.
Big Ten's a different deal,
Yeah.
man, night after night. And it's not like he had a good stretch game. He shot 25% from three. So he was going to have to do a lot of his damage inside. And I think you saw some effect of that. When you're a big man, kind of the threshold number, even if you're a high volume shooting guy, is 50%. If you're below
Right.
50% overall from the floor, quite frankly, you've had a bad year. And he shot 47% from the floor.
Yeah.
That's not good enough. You expect, as I say, a big guy, a decent high volume or high-ish volume big man, you'd kind of start your expectations in the high 50 or in the mid 50s
Yeah.
and go from there. He wasn't close. So, he led them in assists, but he also committed a boatload of turnovers.
Right. Right.
So I just the other thing too that was maybe most damning of all when I watched them, and I only saw him in a couple of instances at Utah State. I didn't see him a lot. I saw him in the NCAA tournament. I think I saw him in a conference tournament game. That was probably about it. I didn't see him a lot. So I didn't really
Mm-hmm.
have an impression of him there. But watching him for Washington, his play did not scream team guy to me.
Yeah. I just seem like a guy.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think the bottom line is you look at those numbers and you might think, wow, that's a lot to replace. Yeah, you've got a hole to fill, but I don't think it's going to be as tough to replace him as maybe those raw numbers suggest. I really don't.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
And it's not, I don't mean by that, well, they've got somebody who's going to step in and give them 17 and 10. It's not about that. It's just that I think they can get by with what they're going to have at the five and be better in so many other ways without him there.
Yeah. Yeah. He's, as you mentioned, he didn't bring a lot of value, certainly, especially with what they're paying him. So next we have Tyler Harris. He's a 6'8" forward. He transferred to Vanderbilt. He was a guy who looks like he was turning into something. He had 11.8 points a game, 5 rebounds a game, shot 49, 50, and 69. And so, he's going to be definitely a loss for this team that I'm sure they hope they were going to retain.
Much bigger loss than Osborne, in my opinion.
Yeah.
In part because they could have actually gotten more time out of him. Osborne was done. But
Right. Right.
I actually liked Tyler Harris. He was the one guy on that team, the only guy that I thought that's someone who can be a really significant part of a good team. And some of their other guys might develop into that. Zoom Diallo might become that, I guess. But Tyler Harris was already that way. He started his career at Portland. I believe he was I think he was the West Coast Conference Freshman of the Year, I think. He had a very good freshman year in any
Yeah.
event. And then he transfers up to Washington, and again, really good. You look at the numbers, 12 points, 5 boards a game, 49, 50, 69.
Right.
That's getting it done. And I remember, I don't have the stats in front of me, but the game they played against Michigan State, where MSU just, completely annihilated them. Just one of the least competitive games by a Big Ten opponent I can remember for a
Yeah.
long, long time. I know they won by 30 plus, but
Hmm.
that was a game that they could have named the score. I mean, if they
Yeah.
wanted to win by 50, they could have. The one guy I remember, and again, I haven't looked at his numbers from that game, but the one guy I remember thinking, man, that's a player, was Harris. And so they lost him. I don't know the ins and outs of that. Sprinkle might have been okay with that for a variety of reasons, but just based on what he showed on the court, that's the one guy I would have wanted to keep around. And I think he's going to be a good player at Vandy. I will not be surprised at all if he ends up being a very productive player at Vanderbilt.
And finally, for important retained players, departing players is Makai Mason, 6'5" wing. He's heading to Wake Forest, the ACC, for his final year. He averaged 9.9 points a game on 43, 40, and 71. So, another guy who is a deep threat and did a little bit of damage.
And that was really about all he did. But yeah, 40% from three is solid.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Wake Forest will have use for him in a similar kind of role. But, other than the shooting, I mean, Mason was not a guy that I really thought of as, a huge loss. Let's put it this way. When we start going through the guys they've got coming in, they've gotten better at that spot.
All right. So as we wipe away those players, it's a reminder that you need to head over to the Squeegee Squad at Grand Rapids if you're in the Grand Rapids area, and that's a very large area, of course. Have them take away care of all your dirt and grime, whether it's on your windows or the side of your house. They can power wash, they can clean the windows, whatever you need done. Head on over to the Squeegee Squad at Grand Rapids. If you need to find ways to contact them, go over to our website. At the support page at tffinots.com/support. There you can get an estimate from Troy and his team. 15% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. And do it today. You'll be very glad you did, so you can do something fun in the fall instead of washing your house. And let's be honest, you're not going to do that anyway. So if you want your house to look good, contact the Squeegee Squad at Grand Rapids. So one of those retained players you were talking about that's important is Zoom Diallo, 6'5" sophomore. He's averaged 11.1 points a game, 3.1 rebounds a game, second on the team in assists. But he still had two turnovers a game. Shot 47, 18, and 72. So you obviously can see the glaring problem there is 18%, but he's still a young player.
There's potential here. And he was a high school All-American. He was considered to be a big get in recruiting circles, and there were a lot of minutes available for him on a bad team, and he got a lot of minutes. And I'm not going to say it was a complete disaster, but I do think what it demonstrated is he was not on a halfway decent team. He wouldn't have had nearly as big a role
Sure.
because he just wasn't efficient at all. He wasn't an efficient playmaker because he's not really a point guard, in my opinion. He's a scoring guard who's got a decent handle. And he really struggles with the shot. And that was the word on him, is that the perimeter jumper is what's got to improve. And boy, that was evident. When you shoot 18% from three, you've got an issue. I mean, we could talk about all the guys that Michigan State fans have moaned about. Tum Tum Nairn, AJ Hogard. Beyond my belief, Jeremy Fears has shot 34% last year, and yet somehow there's a perception he can't shoot.
Yeah.
But none of those guys had a year as bad as what Zoom Diallo just put together. So I'm not writing him off. I think when you watch him, you see the reason he was highly regarded. He's extremely athletic. He's 6'5". He does have a good handle, which means he is a guy that, at least in theory, can go get his own in the
Mm-hmm.
offense. He can create his own shot. And I think if he starts to find more consistency with the jumper, then that makes him a bigger threat all the way around. Right now, he's basically a guy who's got to be able to get to the rim to do damage, because he's not going to hurt you if he's pulling up for a jumper. But I think that could happen. I think he could develop more consistency with the jumper, and that in turn will make the rest of his game even better. And I don't think he needs to become a 40% guy from three to make that happen. He's just got to be good enough that teams have to actually guard him.
Yeah. Can't be 18.
Right. As we say, last year he was a frequent starter. I think it's possible this year with what they've added that maybe he's in a reserve role. But he's going to play a lot no matter what. We'll see if that level of play is improved. I think it's possible that it is, but We'll have to see.
And the other key recruiting player is Frank Kepning, 6'11", 260-pound grad student. He only played 14 games due to injury last season. And he averaged 6.9 points a game when he did play, 5.1 rebounds a game, shot 53% from the floor, 80% from the line, and blocked 2 shots a game.
Yeah, and in fairness, I mean, we spent a lot of time bagging on this team and on Danny Sprinkle's first year. Kepnang was a guy they were really counting on
Mm-hmm.
to play a big role at the five, and he was hurt for more than half the season. And you look at the numbers when he did play, that's reasonably productive play. It's not
Yeah,
superstar level play, but 7 points, 5 boards, 2 blocks, 53 from the floor, 80 at the line. You
yeah,
can live
pretty good.
with that. He's
Sure.
a very big body. Again, 6'11, 260. Can't teach that size. Uh, Now they've added some size to go with him, but I think, and this is the operative word, if we have a healthy Frank Kepnang, he could well be the starter at the five. If he is, I don't think that means he plays 25 minutes a night. I think
Sure.
they're gonna split it up. But this is an important guy because he's experienced and he provides some of the things that Washington had very little of last year and will need if they're going to be more competitive this season, which is defense, rebounding, and physicality.
All right. So that brings us to newcomers now. And the most one that most people recognize probably is Desmond Claude. He's a 6'6" guard. He played at USC last season. So he just transferred north. Averaged 15.8 points a game and 4.2 assists per game. Had number of turnovers, 3.5 turnovers a game. Shot 48, 31, 76. A little under 6 free throw attempts a game. So you can definitely tell that his game was getting inside and causing a lot of trouble. He was, I mean, he was a guy who was a little hard to cover sometimes. We saw Illinois really struggle. Michigan State had some problems with him as well. And so Washington got a really nice piece. And so I'm a little curious the story why he left USC for Washington, but it is what it is at this point.
Yeah. Welcome to 2025.
That's probably the
Uh,
only answer you
Look, well,
need.
you and I saw him play in person against Michigan State.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And if you remember, he was really tough early on, and then he went out hurt for a while
Hmm.
in that game. And I know my feeling was, all right, this is the time MSU makes their run, takes control of the game. They didn't really do that, and then he came back, so it was all a moot point.
Yeah,
But
right.
he was tough in that game. He was just really difficult for MSU to contend with. He's a very good player. I mean, he does a lot of things well. There's no doubt about that. This is my problem, though. Two problems. One, he's not a point guard.
Right.
He's a dynamic player, by which I mean he can make things happen. He can score by himself, he can get his own shot and convert. He is also capable of creating for teammates. He will do that on occasion, but he's way too mistake prone, and his mindset is not what you want out of a lead guard. It just isn't. There are lead guard. There are guys who, well, MSU just signed one or got a commitment from one.
Right.
Um, Carlos
Medlock.
Medlock.
Yeah.
Carlos Medlock is a point guard with a scoring mentality, but that's different than what Desmond Claude is. Desmond Claude is a shooting guard masquerading as a point guard. Carlos Medlock is a point guard. He's a guy who's wired to score a little bit, but that doesn't mean he's not capable and able to run an offense efficiently at the same time. Kalen Lucas was that way. Keith Appling was that way.
Right.
Desmond Claude is not that. He is miscast as a point guard. So, first things first, I want to see how Danny Sprinkle uses him. If he's putting the ball in his hands and saying, "You're my guy at the point," that's a problem.
Hmm.
As good as he is, that is a problem. The second thing is, and this goes for a few of the guys that Washington added, Washington's portal approach this year, to me, seemed to be adding some very good players, guys who have done some things statistically, but the one thing they didn't do is win. And
Uh
so
huh.
I wonder about that. Desmond Claude, for all his talent, USC didn't win. Now he was at Xavier. They were okay when he was there, but sometimes guys can put numbers up. I used to say this all the time about who was the guy at Indiana, Xavier Johnson.
Johnson, yeah.
The most empty stats I've ever seen in my life. To me, he was the epitome of being a non-winning player at the point, especially. And I wonder about that with Desmond Claude. I'm not saying I'm 100% convinced,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know if I believe he's a winning player. By which I mean a guy who can be part of a team that wins, can fit into that. Some guys who are very talented individual players struggle with that. And I have a question about that with him. I don't question the individual talent. I question the fit. I wonder how they're going to use him.
Well, very interestingly, the next player we're going to talk about is also a transfer from USC, another Trojan, Wesley Yates, 6'4" sophomore. He had a pretty, I thought he was pretty good. He averaged 14.1 points a
Very
game,
good.
shot 48,
Very good.
44, and 80. So he was a very good player. I think wasn't a lot of talk about it, probably because he played for USC and they weren't that good last year. So
Yeah.
anyway, seems like a good addition. It's interesting that he followed Claude. I'm sure there's some sort of dynamic there that is not
Well,
shouldn't surprise us a little bit.
maybe it's not as Claude related because Wesley Yates started at Washington and he redshirted there. I
Oh,
think
right,
it
yeah,
was due to injury. And then he transferred to USC
because of
when
the coach.
Washington made the coaching switch, but now he's going back. So I think he always wanted to be at Washington.
Maybe he brought Claude.
It could be. Claude did commit after Yates. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more likely the dynamic if that was in there at all. I, I liked Wesley Yates. I think that there were a lot of good freshmen last year in the Big Ten. I thought it was a good year for freshmen in the league. But to me, you start with the two kids at Rutgers, obviously, who were both top 5 draft picks. And
Yeah,
then you have Derek Queen, who was also a lottery pick at Maryland. So you
right,
probably say those are the top 3 guys. But who would be your next two? Well, Jace Richardson is obviously one of them.
right. Yeah,
But a lot of people might pick the kid who played at Illinois from Lithuania.
yeah. Kachonis.
Yeah, I'd take Wesley Yates. I thought Wesley Yates was better. Nobody knows it because USC was terrible
Mm-hmm.
and they're on the West Coast. And trust me, I'm someone who spent a little bit of time living on the West Coast, just enough to know how much resentment there is from sports fans on the West Coast that their players and teams don't get any credit because they're in the Pacific time zone. And that's true. I do think there's some truth to that.
Uh huh.
And in Big Ten basketball circles, you didn't hear anything really about those guys unless you were a deep fan. If you were just casually paying attention to the Big Ten, you might not even know who Wesley Yates was.
Right,
And he
right.
had a really good year. I mean, the efficiency numbers were great. He got better as the year went along. So I'm bullish. I'm more bullish on him than Claude, mostly because I think Wesley Yates knows who he is.
Yeah,
He's not
it's
trying to
important.
do things. Now, in fairness to Claude, he had no choice. USC, for some reason, Eric Musselman decided not to recruit a point guard last year. So it kind of had to be Claude. So I don't want to put too much of it on Claude necessarily. But regardless, Wesley Yates was playing in a role that he should have been in, and he thrived in it. And I think he's going to thrive in it at Washington. He's really good.
Well, let's move on to our next transfer, who's Kamari Patterson, who was a 6'1" senior transfer from East Tennessee State, where he averaged 22.7 points a game. Was Southern Conference Player of the Year. He shot 48, 42, and 73, high volume of threes. Also had 3.7 assists to 2.2 turnovers a game. So a guy who's, makes some plays. Obviously, it's not like a point guard numbers, but a guy who can score. And, that's one of the things they certainly struggled with last year.
Again, uh, you look at the overall numbers and you say, well, that's a really good get in the portal. Anytime you're player of the year in your conference, even if it's a Southern Conference, you're probably pretty decent.
Sure.
Almost 23 points a game. That's saying something. He was efficient, 48, 42, 73. High volume on the threes. That's legit. My question here is Is he a point guard? I think there's a lot of reason to think that he's probably not,
Hmm.
not really.
Yeah.
And so, how does that fit? If he's the guy, is that really any better than putting the ball in Claude's hands? I don't know.
Yeah.
That I just what this is all coming down to is, and as we move through it, we're gonna the totality of it feels this way to me. Danny Sprinkle added a lot of what in a vacuum has to be viewed as good talent. There's no question about that. But the roster fit just seems weird to me.
Uh-huh.
Like and Claude committed to them late, so that might be part of what's going on. But to me, this was a team that really needed more than anything else. I think would have been better off with a guy, and they may get it from their freshman ranks because they do have an impressive freshman at that position. We'll see how big a role he plays.
Hmm.
But it's a lot of guys who are wired to score, and not a lot of guys who look like team first, run the offense, make
Right.
everybody better kind of guys. But we'll see how it shakes out. Peterson's going to play a big role, whether it's as a starter or a reserve. Time will tell. But it's not that I don't like him. It's just you see where I'm going. I
Yeah.
just don't know about the roster fit, how all these pieces fit together. That's where my questions are.
Well, sure. And you obviously don't have the benefit of watching Washington play for a month in November to see sort of how these pieces fit together,
Right.
who can do what. That's why you get a little bit of a pass for usually ending up last in the beat rod contest.
Yeah, they could come out of the chute and it's all fitting and say, okay, Danny Sprinkle
Yeah.
got it right. There are a lot of people. I can't stress this enough. I am in the minority on this. There are a lot of people who think Washington's going to be really good this year. I've seen national people say they think they're going to be a top 25 team.
Hmm.
I have to see that
Yeah.
because, again, a lot of guys who talented, yes, winners, I don't know.
Or the pieces fit, right? And that's the other thing you just can't know
Yeah.
too, outside of winning. Well, last year it felt like Nebraska was the Big Ten purging team where they just stole everybody's players, and it kind of feels like this way for Washington right now. As we get to our fourth
Yes.
transfer, Lathan Somerville, who we've already talked about when we talked about Rutgers, 6'10", 260-pound sophomore, obviously from Rutgers. He averaged 8.2 points a game, 4.1 rebounds a game, shot 51, 11, and 86.
Yeah, I think he's got potential to be a good player. I felt that way last season.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he didn't show much of it last year, but he actually does have the potential, I think, to become maybe not a great 3-point threat, but something of a stretch guy. I don't think he's just strictly a back to the basket player.
Right.
He's skilled. He's God knows he's big. Um, I think he's probably coming off the bench this season. If they have their ideal, I suspect Kepnine is the starter, but Somerville's going to play. And if you can keep him around, you have 2 more years out of him, at least.
Yeah.
The courts may tell us he could have 10 years there.
Ha! That's a whole
And
different
I'm
thing.
not
Yeah.
kidding. I mean, we just had a decision this week that
As we were recording this, yeah, right.
get ready. If you
Unlimited
if you
college
love the
athletic.
idea of Hunter Dickinson and his ilk playing in college for 15 years, get ready because you're about
Yep.
ready to see it.
Yep.
But anyway, getting back to the subject at hand, Somerville's a nice addition. Um, we'll see how big the role is. There's going to be some role for him. I just don't know how big.
And next we have Jakob Ognancevich, Ognancevich, 6'8", 210-pound, fifth-year senior out of Lipscomb, where he averaged 20 points a game, 8 rebounds a game, and was Atlantic Sun Player of the Year, where he shot 58, 40, and 80, and also averaged 6 free throw attempts a game.
Yeah, lot to like. And
Yeah,
again, anytime you're a conference player of the year, I take that seriously. That now you can question, well, what level of production does that translate to in the Big Ten?
right,
Remains
right.
to be seen. But this is a guy who's going to play a lot and be a help at the four. could be as a starter, but he's going to be in the rotation somewhere. Uh, Great credentials. You like the efficiency. I mean, 40% from three. So you're talking about a true, and 58% overall to go with that. So that's a true three-level scoring threat.
Hmm.
And then he shot 80% at the line to go with the six free throw attempts per game. So eight boards. I mean, there's real production there. And they need that. I mean, that was Washington was just non competitive in pretty much all areas, but one of
Right.
them for sure was the interior. They just couldn't board with people. They were hopeless there. Outside of Osibor, and we talked about what his issues were. This is a guy who I think can help shore that up at a minimum, and he might be better than that.
And then we have another Big Ten steal, Bryson Tucker, 6'6" sophomore forward who played at Indiana. And he was, so he shot 38, 15, and 72, averaged a little around 5.5 points a game in the 23 games he played. He's a guy who played less and less throughout the season. He was the enigmatic player who did AAU and then stopped, and it was sort of like not sure where he was going to end up. And I know Michigan State was involved in his recruitment for a while, and then they kind of, I don't want to say let him go, but certainly uh, he ended up at Indiana. Strange kind of situation with him. I think their hope was, at least, was that he was going to be a one and done. I think that's sort of his camp, and clearly that wasn't going to happen. And at this point, it's hard to imagine him being a two and done. But I guess we'll see.
Oh, I think at this point it's hard to imagine him being a foreign done. If by that you mean the NBA. Look,
Yeah,
and I'm kidding, but not entirely.
yeah,
Uh, I don't understand. I don't understand what's going on in that world. If we ever do get uh, Tom Izzo on this show, he'll know. I wouldn't ask him this on the air. I would try and put him on the spot. But I would love to know what in the world was MSU doing involved in that one. You
yeah.
almost could not pick a situation more antithetical to what Michigan State's program has been about than the Bryson Tucker story.
Hmm.
I mean, you talk about it, and that doesn't mean that I think kids have to play AAU. That's okay. Although it does seem weird that it doesn't happen often that you see that, but when it does, like the last MSU player that I remember doing that was Marcus Taylor. And there were a lot of things I loved about Marcus Taylor, but you can't pretend that that wasn't kind of a weird couple years.
Well, certainly a warning sign, red flag, maybe, right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
You're on it. Um, then I don't know why Bryson Tucker went to Indiana. I have no idea. They had guys upon guy upon guy. You know, when they signed the big doof from Arizona, Balo, that meant that Mbako had to play the three. He had to because they had the other big kid, Renault, was going to have to play the four because they got
Right.
Balo to play the five. So there's no starting spot there. And then remember, they also had guys like Luke Goody. They had the Geronimo kid too. I mean, I don't know how they ever thought there was a role there for him. It didn't make any sense. And sure enough, he didn't play a lot. And eventually, down the stretch, he wasn't playing at all.
Yeah.
And the numbers were terrible. When you look at Bryson Tucker, and I thought this when I saw him in high school, you could see why people were enamored of him. He's got a pro looking body for a wing. He's physically, I don't mean he's a bruiser, but he's well put together.
Right.
Got good positional size. He's got a handle that makes you think, yeah, this is a guy that can go get his own, you know. But the shooting touch has always been questioned, and he didn't answer those questions last year. And so his leaving Indiana was no surprise with the coaching change and all of that. But why is he at Washington? I don't see his situation being any better on the surface at Washington than it was at Indiana. I mean, I guess Sprinkle likes his potential, but I mean, for both the player and the coach, this is a heavy duty risk reward play, in my opinion. If Bryson Tucker suddenly finds some efficiency in his game and learns how to play within a team concept, boy, you could really have something because there is some quote unquote talent there. But if I'm betting, I'm taking the under on this one.
Well, that brings us to if you want to make sure you stay on the right side of betting and you want to bet on good gutters, head on over to the Brothers Just Your Gutters. They do fantastic work, whether it's just cleaning them out, and we are getting to that time of fall, the leaves are falling, and you don't want to clean them out yourself. In fact, if you're smart, you have them put on leaf guards so you don't have to do it ever again. Maybe you got a leaky gutter. They can fix that too, or you replace the whole set, downspouts, whatever it might be. They can do it the job. Whether you're on the west side, the east side of the state, the Brothers Just Your Gutters will take care of you. They'll get up on the ladder so you don't have to, and you do something fun, which is anything besides cleaning gutters. You can get a hold of them for 10% off if you mention Final Four. You can do that getting an estimate at our support page, tffinots.com/support. And again, you just pick the person either the west side or the east side of the state, and they can take care of you and set you up. Because if you don't have operated gutters, you got all kinds of problems, and it's going to be bad. So make sure you take care of that today. That brings us to Christian Nitu, a 6'11 transfer from Florida State. He played 7 minutes a game, 22 appearances for a bad team. So, I mean, obviously, this is sort of like taking a flyer on a guy who's 6'11 and just kind of hoping it works out.
Yeah, I think it's a future play because strength would seem to be a major priority in terms of what needs to develop here. And they've got they've added Somerville in the portal. They've got Kepname back. I don't think there's any kind of need for Nitu to play this year unless something bad happens. So that's okay. You take a chance on a guy with length and size. You continue to take some time to work on his body,
Yeah.
get him stronger, and you just see what happens.
Yeah.
So no problem. I mean, in this day and can you keep him long enough for any of that to matter? We'll see, but that's what I think the play is here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you got 3 years with him, right? He's a sophomore. So then we have Mauti Triori, 7-footer, 200-pound junior, transfer from Frank Phillips College in Texas, but was also previously at Maryland, New Mexico State. Since he's JUCO, I guess those years don't count. So you've got a little extra eligibility if you want. He averaged
He'll
13
be
points a
he'll be
game.
playing in 2031.
He averaged 13 points a game, 8.4 rebounds a game. But of course, stepping up in competition this season. So huge wingspan, 7'6". So I mean, the guy probably doesn't even have to jump in order to dunk the ball. But anyway, he's he's going to have a. It'll be a new competition at least in the Big Ten.
This one is wild to me. Well, with what I've read, Danny Sprinkle has said. Okay, 7 feet, 7'6" wingspan, sure. Kind of goes along with what we just said about Nitu, right?
Yeah.
This is a guy who didn't do anything in two D1 years at Maryland and then New Mexico State. He did have a good year, reasonably good year at a JUCO stop, but he hasn't done anything yet at the high major level. But here's the kicker: he's only 200 pounds, so
Yeah.
you would say, well, he's got to bulk up. He's got to get stronger. That's why he didn't help at those D1 stops. But Sprinkle thinks he can play the wing.
What?
I want to see a 7 foot, 200-pound guy with a 7'6" wingspan playing the wing.
It'd be pretty
I
awesome if it
do.
works
I
out.
want to see it. Um, he says that, and I want to give him his due. He says that because I think he's talking offensively because he believes that Traore showed some decent perimeter shooting at his JUCO stop. But that's only one side of the court. Can he guard? I mean, maybe it'll all be a Jaron Jackson Jr. special, and he'll get blown by, but his length will allow him to block guys' shots who will blow him by him. I don't know,
Right. Right.
but this is one I'm going to watch. I want to see how they use him. It's you kind of. I hope you're seeing why I'm befuddled in some ways by this team. I understand somebody taking a shot on a guy like this. If you've got, we're in a 15 scholarship era, nobody's using
Right.
all 15.
Yeah.
So if you can get a guy like that and it's a wild card play, maybe it comes up aces for you. I get it. But then you start talking about him playing the wing. I don't know. We'll see. It's intriguing. I think that's the word I want to use here.
Well, we'll see how he does against. Usually, I feel like they always play Eastern Washington or some sort of like a Seattle or something to start the season. So we'll see what happens with Washington. Next, we have JJ Mandaquit, 6'1" guard. He's originally from Miami, or sorry, Miami, from Hawaii. He played for Team USA, and he's averaging 6 points a game, 5 assists a game at the point guard spot. So he's one of the ones you're talking about who's potentially a guy who's going to come in and maybe play the point. Obviously depends on sort of how he looks.
Uh, it's going to tell me a lot. First of all, Mandaquit's got to actually be the guy that he's been hyped up to be.
Right.
He's a highly regarded recruit. He wasn't a top 20 guy, but he was a solidly rated recruit, and he was a Team USA staple in his age group. So those numbers you mentioned, 6 points, 5 assists per game, was for Team USA at this summer's FIBA World Championships. So he was a big part of that team, and that was something that Jeremy Fears played that kind of role for
Yeah.
Team USA. He had been in the program for a long time, and when push came to shove, he ended up playing a bigger role for his team than a couple of guys who were rated ahead of him. Similar situation here. Everything you hear about this guy is that he's a winner, that he's tough, he's a leader, he's exactly the kind of player that, if again, all those things have to actually pan out, but that's the way he's talked about
Right.
by a lot of people, not just Danny Sprinkle. So if he really has those attributes, man, and he's a point guard, they don't have another one that I'm actually convinced is a point guard on this roster. If he's actually those things, it is going to tell me a lot about Danny Sprinkle in terms of the role that this kid gets. Because if he really can deliver on that stuff, then you play him a ton at
Yeah.
that position because he's the kind of guy you want establishing your culture, what your program's going to be about, you know? And maybe he doesn't shoot the ball as well yet as say Peterson does or Claude does, but he's going to make your team better by playing him at that position.
Right.
You know, it's going to be very telling to me. And again, I'm not talking about a guy who was rated 120. It's not a stretch to say he's going to play major minutes. I kind of expect him to, but I just want to see how all the pieces, how all the dominoes fall, and the significance of the role that Mandaquit gets and what he's able to do with it is going to tell me a lot about what this team is or isn't.
Next, we have Hannes Steinbach, 6'11", 220-pound forward from Germany. He's a late addition to the class. He played in the U19 German team, national team, led them to a silver medal. Where he averaged 17 points a game and 13 rebounds a game. So maybe a really good get by Sprinkle here.
Yeah, and a very intriguing one because he was a late addition, as you said. And Euro kids, it's always a mystery, right? But this is a guy you're starting to see for whatever it's worth, which is limited at this point, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not nothing. He's already being mocked in the first round for next year in some quarters. I think anytime you can do what he did in a world championship level for your country, that
Right.
suggests something real. 17 and 13 is something else. And he led Germany to a silver medal. That's pretty damn good. So there's real potential here. He supposedly has a true inside outside offensive game, but the rebounding, 13 rebounds a game in that world championship tournament, that's what people are talking about here as much as anything else. And frankly, that's one of the main areas Washington's got to get a lot better. We talked about Ognacevic as a guy with, was his conference's player of the year, very productive player, all those
Mm-hmm.
things. But can he hold off Steinbach at the four? I think the two of them together could be a pretty nice combination. But it's going to be interesting to me to see how Steinbach, we're talking about a lot of portal guys, as we said at the outset, who have real track records of individual success. But they've got a couple freshmen here who, to me, look like guys that might be capable of just kind of kicking the door down and forcing their way into bigger
Yeah.
roles than maybe some would think. And Steinbach would be one of those candidates.
One other one, it's another freshman guard, Corlin Muldrew, 6'3", from Texas, four-star combo guard. So, whether he makes it onto the floor much is up for debate as well.
And in a normal year, a program like Washington would probably be pretty excited about Muldrew because he's a lower end top 100 guy, so
Right.
not a guy without pedigree. But you look at the number of players that have been assembled here, and it's kind of tough seeing where the role comes from. They do think he can be a versatile guard who can play on and off the ball down the line, but right now I'd be betting against his playing major minutes unless there are some injuries.
And finally, we have Jasir Rencher, 6'5" freshman from Oakland, and strong, good athlete, but not a good shooter by reputation.
Yeah, and I think with him for sure, you're likely looking at a year of development
Sure.
and kind of figuring it out. And Washington's fortunate, I guess, unlike last year, they don't have to force somebody who probably isn't ready for big
Right.
minutes to play big minutes.
All right. So that brings us to conclusion. We have Washington, you have them here sitting at 13th, which is not bad, certainly an improvement from last year. And as you mentioned, a lot of people have Washington ranked much higher. And then, as always, with any of these teams, especially, I feel like where you have huge transitions, it's hard to have any sort of feel for what they're going to be like next year until you see them on the floor and see how they start doing, which is always a huge advantage, obviously, to those in our competition who have a chance to watch Washington up until the first Big Ten game in December. Uh, so I guess for Washington, it looks like things moving in the right direction under Sprinkle. And he's got, as you mentioned, he's got a mixture of new talent from elsewhere, transfers, and he also has freshman talent. So maybe just trying to build something real.
Yeah, and as I said early in this, there's a chance that my pick here looks really bad. If in all seriousness, if I look at kind of just objectively the quote unquote talent, which is not the way I prefer to look at things, but if you kind of add up the individual talent of all the guys on this roster and what they could be, they could be a top 5 team.
Mm-hmm.
That's not out of the realm of possibility. I don't think that's going to happen, but there's a world in which it could. I have to be honest, and as I say, I am on the low end of projections for this group, but I've got a rationale for it, which I'm going to go through. But I have to acknowledge there's a case that I may have maybe even significantly underrated this team. We got people out there saying they think they're going to be a top 25 team by season's end. And honestly, I can't look at the potential in the best possible world of this team absolutely could be that good,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But I just can't move them much higher than I've got without actually seeing it. One challenge they're dealing with is something, and I don't think most of these people who are talking about them as being one of the most improved teams in the country are giving this enough thought, in my opinion. To me, this looks like a situation in some ways very similar to what Tom Izzo dealt with Michigan State a year ago. I just listened to a podcast today. This will date for those of you paying attention when we actually recorded this. Um, there was a podcast released today with John Rothstein, who's a guy who does
Yeah.
a lot of college basketball work for CBS. He's renowned on Twitter for his rather unique personality. Anyway, he had Tom Izzo on, and he was reminding Tom of something that he had said to him during the NCAA tournament. I guess Rothstein was covering the first 2 rounds that MSU. He was at the MSU site, and Izzo had said something about that it's very tough to coach a team that deep. Now Izzo clarified, said what he was really getting at was something he talked about a few times during the season, which is it was tough in a situation where he couldn't really distinguish his best player from his eighth or ninth player, and he really wanted somebody to step up and be the go-to guy, right? Eventually
Yeah.
that sorted out. We did get there with Jace Richardson in the end. But that was an issue. But I think what Rothstein thought he meant, and what I think actually was remarkable for MSU last season, is how do you keep your culture together? How do you keep everybody happy when you've got that many mouths to feed,
Yeah.
right? And
200
MSU
minutes. Yeah.
did it. MSU did it. They hung together all year. Nobody showed jealousy. Nobody got out of line. Nobody popped off in the media. They weren't getting enough shots. It was remarkable because that was a true 1 through 10 kind of thing. I look at this Washington team and boy, what kind of role is Zoom Diallo going to have on
Yeah.
this team? I don't know. Like it's kind of hard for me when I see the pieces they've added to imagine that he starts. And if he does start, what happens to one of those guys who's come on board who's now not starting? What happens if one of those three transfers they've added isn't starting because they're starting the freshman point guard? And how's the balance of minutes going to play out?
Hmm.
There's a lot of that. And this is kind of what I was getting at when I say it's all well and good to add guys who have put up numbers and have done things. That's great and that's important. But you've got to be able to fit the pieces into roles that make sense and are going to collectively. The ideal is you want the whole to be greater than the sum of the individual parts, right? That's the
Yep.
goal because that's going to
Right.
produce your best results. That's what Michigan State had going for them last year. I think that was absolutely the case. The whole was greater than the sum of the individual parts. We have no idea whether Danny Sprinkle's capable of doing that with this group. You
Right.
know, how do you keep everybody happy and playing for the team rather than themselves? And then I look specifically at a lot of these guys. There's a lot of guys on this team who likely think and have some reason to think they should have the ball in their hands a lot.
Yeah.
Claude and Yates were 14 point per game plus guys in the Big Ten last year. You know, then you've added two guys who were players of the year in their conference last season. You would imagine they think that they should have their shots. Diallo and Tucker were high school All Americans. Now they had years that didn't match that level of recognition necessarily last season,
Right.
but I'm going to guess neither one of them has kind of wavered in their belief that they're very, very good.
Yeah.
Um, you're talking about the Steinbach kid already as a potential first rounder, and Mandaquit has been a starter or a significant player for Team USA. Can Sprinkle mold a team out of that group? If you gave this group, if Tom Izzo had this collection of players, my doubt level is very greatly reduced because I've seen him do it.
Right.
I know he's got that ability. And I know that he wouldn't have guys in there who weren't at least giving very strong indications that they were bought into that kind of concept. I have
Right. Right.
nobody has any idea about Danny Sprinkle in that regard. They just don't. And anybody who's telling you they think they do, I think is full of shit. They don't know. Maybe he works it out. Maybe he pulls it all together. And if he does, I'll give him all the credit in the world because that is going to be a challenging thing, in my opinion, with this team. Um, just to kind of go back to what I had said earlier and emphasize it, I think Mandaquit might be the most important guy on this team. He's not necessarily the best player, but I think he's going to be the most important guy because
Right.
I don't believe in anybody else as a winning Big Ten point guard. I don't know if he's that either, but he's the one guy that I can look at the profile and say, well, he would seem to have a chance to be exactly what the doctor ordered. If he could do the job as a true freshman, the level of this team could rise significantly. Um, and then I'm going to go back to something we talked about early on. Sprinkle talks about emphasizing playing fast. That can work if you do it the right way. But
Hmm.
in the Big Ten, it tends to produce trouble when that gets emphasized to the detriment of other things. And we haven't seen it from Danny Sprinkle. We don't know what he really means by that. Um, but I always, whenever I hear a new coach or a newer coach in this league kind of lead off with that talk, I say, batten down the hatches, boys, because you're about to learn some lessons. And usually they do. Usually they figure out. And even, sometimes the ones that don't, Fran McCaffrey, you know, it went okay, but there were major flaws.
Yeah,
There was
right.
a ceiling on his program, I think, in part because of that.
Yeah,
Um, and the other thing, which I really even haven't spent much time talking about, all the emphasis in our discussion has been on what these guys did offensively or on the boards. Let us not forget, this was a horrendous defensive team last year as well. Now they've changed, the chairs on the deck have been entirely rearranged. Is that going to mean they're better defensively? It has to. Will it be? I don't know. Claude and Yates were part of a USC team that sure as hell wasn't very good defensively last year.
yeah,
You know, um, I didn't see Bryson Tucker guard anybody that well. On and on and on. True freshman, who knows? So I get the enthusiasm, and I absolutely think this is a team that could be NCAA tournament quality. I don't dispute that, but I am very much from Missouri on this one. They are going to have to show me that all of this works, because just as easily, in fact, more easily than I see it working, I see problems.
yep. Yeah, as all these seem to be interesting to see what they turn out to be. And we won't know for a couple months until probably we get into December. And then even then, I guess things change. So, all right. Well, we'll leave it there. Again, reminder to head on over to our support page at tffionts.com/support. There you can find links to all our sponsors. Get your 20% off at Nudge Printing by just typing Final Four at checkout. Also, you can find ways to support the show, which we really appreciate, whether it's on Substack or Patreon. It also gives you an opportunity to get an ad-free version of the show. Uh, and so make sure you join all the ranks who are doing that too. It'd be great to have you along. So until the next time, when we talk about the number 12 team that Rod has selected for the Big Ten, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.